Last month, I walked through a brand new 400-unit building in Austin. 40% of it sat completely empty. Not renovation, not pre-leasing, empty because nobody who wanted to live there could actually afford the rent the spreadsheet demanded. And here's the part that should scare you. Austin isn't the exception, it's the pattern. 9 major American cities are sitting on the same quiet collapse right now. Half-full towers, 6-month concessions, landlords burning cash to hide vacancy numbers from investors who still think everything's fine. This isn't a random housing story, it's a warning most real estate creators won't touch because the people paying their bills don't want it said out loud. Stick with me to the end because city number 1 on this list isn't just empty, it's a preview of what's coming to a city near you. Subscribe now because most people still don't realize how bad number 1 really is.
Number 9 on this list, Charlotte, North Carolina. For a decade, Charlotte was the golden child of Sunbelt migration. Banks, tech transplants, and young renters fleeing expensive coastal cities all showed up at once. Developers couldn't build fast enough. Cranes lined the skyline like a boomtown. Real estate influencers called it recession-proof. Nobody mentioned what happens when a city builds for a wave of renters that eventually stops arriving. At its peak, Charlotte was averaging thousands of new residents a month. Rent climbed nearly 40% in 5 years. Investors called it the next Austin. Developers broke ground on high-rise after high-rise, betting the migration curve would never bend. Realtors bragged about bidding wars on units that hadn't even topped out yet. For a while, it actually worked. New towers filled almost as fast as they opened. Then the math broke. Remote work migration slowed. Interest rates doubled the cost of financing new construction almost overnight. But developers who'd already broken ground couldn't stop mid-project. Buildings kept opening into a market that had quietly stopped growing underneath them. By 2025, Charlotte had more new apartment units than new renters to fill them. Nobody adjusted the plans, the cranes just kept building straight into a wall nobody in the room wanted to see coming. Here's where it gets ugly. Charlotte's own multifamily data now shows vacancy in new luxury buildings sitting above 20% in several submarkets. Some individual towers reportedly running closer to 35% empty a full year after opening. Landlords are quietly offering 2, sometimes 3 months free just to get a lease signed, then hiding those concessions from the advertised rent so the building looks full on paper. One local property manager put it bluntly on a Charlotte housing forum. "We're not renting apartments anymore, we're negotiating hostage releases." A Redditor in the same thread just replied, "Capitalism cosplaying as a housing shortage." The buildings didn't get worse, the location didn't get worse, the math did. Charlotte didn't lose its appeal, it lost the endless wave of new arrivals its entire growth model was quietly betting on, and nobody wrote that risk into the pro forma. And if you think Charlotte is the worst of it, it's not even close. Number 8 on this list isn't just sitting empty, it's actively losing population while new towers keep going up around it.
Number 8. Phoenix, Arizona. For years, Phoenix was the escape hatch for Californians priced out of their own state. Cheaper homes, no state income tax on the horizon of debate, and endless sun. Between 2020 and 2023, Phoenix added more new apartment units than almost any metro in the country. It felt like the whole desert was under construction at once. At the peak, builders were breaking ground on entire master-planned communities in a single quarter. Home values jumped over 30% in under 2 years. Investors from out of state bought units sight unseen, convinced Phoenix would just keep absorbing anyone California pushed out. For a moment, every unit that opened got snapped up almost instantly. But here's what nobody tells you. Phoenix wasn't just growing, it was overbuilding for a migration wave that had a ceiling. Once mortgage rates climbed and remote work relocation slowed nationally, the flow of new arrivals didn't match the flow of new units still opening. Builders who'd locked in land and permits years earlier had no way to pump the brakes. Supply kept landing on a demand curve that had already flattened. The data is brutal. Phoenix now has one of the highest multifamily vacancy rates of any major Sunbelt metro, with several submarkets reporting vacancy north of 15% and select new luxury complexes sitting closer to 30% empty more than a year after opening. Rent growth has gone negative year over year in parts of the metro, meaning landlords aren't just failing to raise rent, they're actively cutting it and still can't fill units. A local leasing agent posted on a Phoenix housing forum, "We built a city for people who stopped showing up." Another commenter replied, "Phoenix built an ark for a flood that already passed." This is the part most housing creators skip because it complicates the "just move to a cheap Sunbelt city" narrative they're selling you. Overbuilding isn't a Phoenix problem. It's a symptom of an entire migration pattern that peaked, got mistaken for a permanent trend, and got built into concrete before anyone corrected course. The math didn't lie here either. The desert didn't change. The demand did. And thousands of empty units are the receipt. If you thought Phoenix was rough, number 7 isn't just overbuilt. It's a city where the population is shrinking while brand new towers keep opening around the empty ones.
Number 7, Chicago, Illinois. This one's different from the last two. Chicago isn't a boomtown that overbuilt. It's a city that's been quietly losing people for over a decade, while developers kept building luxury towers downtown like nothing was happening. Chicago's downtown skyline has added thousands of new high-rise units since 2015, mostly aimed at young professionals and out-of-state transplants. On paper, it looked like confidence in the city's future. Developers pointed to Chicago's relatively affordable rent compared to New York or San Francisco and bet that professionals priced out of the coasts would flood in to fill the gap. Here's what nobody tells you. While downtown kept building upward, Chicago's broader metro population has been shrinking year after year, driven out by high property taxes, rising crime concerns in certain neighborhoods, and a state budget crisis that keeps threatening tax hikes. The people leaving weren't the ones the new luxury towers were built for, but the exodus still hit demand across the entire rental market, including downtown. The numbers are stark. Chicago has posted net population loss in multiple recent years running, even as its downtown submarket added record numbers of new units. Several new luxury buildings are reporting vacancy above 20% within their first 18 months, and landlords are offering aggressive concession packages, free parking, free amenities, months of free rent just to avoid publishing the real occupancy numbers. A longtime Chicago broker put it on a local real estate forum, "We're marketing luxury living to a population that's mailing us their forwarding address." A commenter replied underneath, "Nothing says world-class city like begging people to stay for a free gym membership." This is the part that should genuinely unsettle you if you're watching from outside Chicago. This isn't overbuilding chasing a slowing wave like Phoenix. This is new supply landing directly on top of active population decline, arguably the most dangerous version of this pattern, because there's no incoming wave left to eventually catch up and fill the gap. The buildings are beautiful, the location is still Chicago, but the math is working against landlords in a way concrete and marketing can't fix. And if a shrinking population wasn't alarming enough, number 6 on this list combines that same population decline with something even more dangerous, an entire local economy that's disappearing underneath the housing market at the same time.
Number 6, Cleveland, Ohio. This is where the pattern shifts from too many units, not enough renters, to something heavier, an entire local economy quietly hollowing out underneath the housing market. Cleveland was once a manufacturing powerhouse, and even after the steel and auto jobs left decades ago, downtown redevelopment in the last 10 years tried to rebrand the city as a healthcare and tech hub. Developers converted old industrial buildings and office towers into modern apartments, betting that Cleveland Clinic expansion and a wave of remote workers chasing cheap rent would fill them. For a few years, it looked like it might work. Loft conversions leased up. Downtown Cleveland saw its first real residential boom in generations. Real estate content creators called it an undervalued comeback city. But here's what nobody tells you. The jobs anchoring that comeback never fully materialized at the scale developers priced into their projections. Cleveland's metro population has declined in nearly every recent census count, and major employers have quietly trimmed headcount rather than expanded it. The renters weren't just slow to arrive. The jobs meant to bring them never showed up in the numbers the pro formas assumed. The data reflects it. Several downtown Cleveland apartment conversions are running vacancy rates above 18%, and property tax delinquencies on residential buildings have climbed as landlords struggle to cover debt service on buildings that never leased up to projections. Meanwhile, average household income in parts of the metro has stayed flat while rent asks kept climbing to justify the renovation costs. A Cleveland area property manager wrote on a regional forum, "We didn't build apartments, we built a bet on jobs that got canceled." Someone replied, "Cleveland,
rebuilding the skyline for an economy that left in 1985 and never called. This is the version of the pattern most housing content won't touch, because it isn't just about oversupply, it's about a local economy that can't generate enough income to support the housing built on top of it. Empty buildings here aren't a temporary correction. They're a symptom of a tax base and job market that's been shrinking for a generation. The building didn't fail. The bet on a comeback that hadn't actually happened yet did. And if you think an economy disappearing underneath a housing market is bad, Number 5 takes that same problem and adds a second, far more dangerous variable: insurance companies refusing to even cover the buildings anymore.
Number 5, New Orleans, Louisiana. This is where the empty apartment story stops just being about jobs and migration and turns into something scarier, an entire insurance market that's quietly refusing to cover the buildings people are supposed to live in. New Orleans has always sold a lifestyle, culture, history, low cost of living compared to other historic American cities. Developers spent the last decade converting warehouses and historic buildings downtown into apartments, betting on tourism recovery and remote workers chasing charm at a discount. Here's what nobody tells you. After a string of major hurricanes and billions in insured losses across the Gulf Coast, private insurers have been pulling out of Louisiana entirely. The ones that stayed have raised premiums by triple digits in some cases. Landlords who once budgeted a few $100s a month for building insurance are now facing bills that have doubled or tripled almost overnight, and that cost either gets passed straight to renters or the building simply stops being profitable to operate. The numbers are ugly. Louisiana's state-backed insurer of last resort has seen enrollment surge as private companies exit, and several New Orleans multifamily buildings are reporting insurance costs now eating 20% or more of total operating income. Meanwhile, occupancy in newer downtown conversions has slipped as landlords raise rent to cover the gap, pricing out the very renters the buildings were designed for. A local property manager posted on a regional housing forum, "Our biggest expense isn't the mortgage anymore, it's the insurance bill that shows up like a second rent payment." Someone replied, "New Orleans real estate, gorgeous buildings, uninsurable roofs, and a landlord's blood pressure to match." This is the layer most real estate creators avoid entirely, because it's not a story about bad decisions or slowing migration. It's a story about climate risk quietly repricing entire cities from the outside, regardless of how good the location or the building actually is. You could fix vacancy with better marketing. You can't market your way around an insurer that simply won't write the policy. The building is fine, the location is fine. The risk underneath it isn't, and that risk is now showing up directly in whether landlords can even afford to keep the lights on. If insurance companies abandoning a city sounds bad, number 4 combines that same risk with a housing crash so severe, homeowners are already walking away with 6-figure losses.
Number 4, Austin, Texas, the city this whole video actually started in. Remember that 400-unit building from the opening? This is why it's sitting 40% empty. Austin spent the early 2020s as the poster child of the remote work migration boom. Tech companies opened offices, out-of-state buyers paid cash sight unseen, and developers responded the only way developers know how: building as fast as permits would allow. Between 2021 and 2023, Austin issued more multifamily building permits per capita than almost any city in America. It felt unstoppable, and every real estate influencer said so. Here's what nobody tells you. Austin didn't just attract renters, it attracted every developer in the country chasing the same renters at the same time. By 2024, thousands of new units were opening every single month into a rental market that had already absorbed most of the demand it was ever going to get. The wave that justified the building spree simply ran out before the cranes did. The numbers are staggering. Austin now has one of the highest apartment vacancy rates of any major U.S. metro, with some analysts putting new construction vacancy above 20%. Rent has fallen for consecutive quarters, not flattened, fallen, as landlords compete against literal next-door buildings offering identical floor plans for less. Meanwhile, homeowners who bought at the 2022 peak have watched values drop so hard that some are walking away from closings with 6-figure losses, real signed check losses, not paper losses. A local leasing agent wrote on an Austin housing forum, "We're not competing with the apartment across the street. We're competing with the apartment across the street and the one next to it and the one being built right now." A commenter replied, "Austin built a skyline for a wave that already broke."
This is the part most housing creators still won't say out loud, because Austin is supposed to be the success story, the proof that Sunbelt migration works. But the math tells a different story. You can build for demand, or you can build past it. Austin built past it, and now landlords and homeowners are both paying the price at the same time. The rent isn't high here anymore. It's the vacancy that's brutal. And it's about to get worse, because number 3 isn't just overbuilt. It's a city where entire finished buildings are sitting completely unopened.
Number 3, Nashville, Tennessee. This is the entry where the pattern gets genuinely bizarre, because in Nashville, some brand new buildings aren't just sitting empty, they're sitting completely unopened, finished and fully permitted, with the lights off and the leasing office locked. Nashville rode the same Sunbelt migration wave as Austin and Phoenix. Country music tourism, no state income tax, and a flood of corporate relocations brought developers running. Between 2019 and 2023, Nashville's downtown and surrounding submarkets added tens of thousands of new apartment units, with dozens more towers still under construction as the market started to turn. Here's what nobody tells you. Several of those projects were financed on short-term construction loans that assumed rents would keep climbing right up until move-in day. When rents flattened and then dropped instead, some developers found themselves holding a finished building they literally couldn't afford to open because operating costs, including staff, utilities, and insurance, exceeded what they could realistically charge in a suddenly oversupplied market. Rather than lease at a loss, some owners are sitting on vacant, finished inventory, waiting for the market to catch up or waiting to sell the building outright before ever renting a single unit. The data backs it up. Nashville's multifamily pipeline delivered a record number of units in recent years, pushing vacancy in new construction above 18% metro-wide, with certain submarkets reporting entire buildings still at near zero occupancy months after receiving their certificate of occupancy. Construction lenders are reportedly extending or restructuring loans on multiple stalled properties, rather than force a fire sale lease-up. A Nashville broker posted on a local forum, "We have finished buildings standing empty like museum pieces nobody bought tickets to." Someone replied, "Nashville, build it and they didn't come, but at least the elevator works." This is the part almost no real estate creator wants to touch because it breaks the assumption most viewers make that an empty building at least means someone tried and failed to rent it. In Nashville, some buildings never even got that far. The math broke before the leasing office ever opened its doors. The lesson here is uncomfortable. A finished building isn't proof of demand. It's proof someone believed in demand 2 years ago, before the numbers changed underneath them. And if a locked, unopened building sounds strange, number 2 takes this same pattern statewide across an entire region nobody expected to collapse this fast.
Number 2, Cape Coral, Florida. And this is where a single city's problem becomes a warning for an entire state. Cape Coral spent the pandemic years as one of the fastest-growing housing markets in the country. Waterfront lots, no state income tax, and a flood of out-of-state buyers turned this once sleepy Gulf Coast city into a builder's dream. Developers broke ground on entire new subdivisions and multifamily complexes almost as fast as land could be permitted, betting the migration wave would keep climbing indefinitely. Here's what nobody tells you. Florida's property insurance market was already cracking before the building boom even peaked. Repeated hurricane seasons pushed private insurers to drop coverage across the state, leaving landlords and homeowners scrambling for the state-backed insurer of last resort, at premiums that have more than doubled in some zip codes. At the same time, HOA and condo association fees across Florida spiked after new state laws forced buildings to fund structural safety reserves following the Surfside condo collapse. 2 separate cost shocks landed on landlords at the exact same time demand started cooling. The numbers are severe. Cape Coral and the surrounding Fort Myers metro have posted some of the sharpest home price corrections in the country, with certain new construction condo buildings sitting near 25% vacant more than a year after completion. Insurance and HOA costs alone now account for a larger share of monthly housing costs in parts of Florida than the mortgage itself. A Cape Coral property manager wrote on a regional forum, "We're not losing tenants to bad economy. We're losing them to a $1,200 insurance bill nobody budgeted for." A commenter replied, "Florida real estate, buy the dream, inherit the deductible." This is the layer most housing creators skip entirely because it isn't about one city's mistake, it's a statewide structural cost problem that's quietly repricing housing up and down the entire Gulf Coast, regardless of how good any individual building or location actually is. You can't fix a $1,000 a month insurance bill with better marketing or a nicer lobby. The math didn't just break in Cape Coral. It broke across an entire coastline, and almost nobody outside Florida has connected the dots yet. And if a statewide insurance collapse sounds like the worst of it, number one isn't just a city, it's the clearest, most extreme version of every pattern on this list combined.
Number 1, San Francisco, California, the city where every pattern on this list collides at once. San Francisco spent 2 decades as the most desirable, most expensive rental market in America. Tech wealth poured in, developers built luxury towers downtown, and landlords operated like vacancy would never be a real possibility. Rent per square foot in some buildings rivaled Manhattan. Here's what nobody tells you. The same forces breaking Charlotte, Phoenix, Chicago, Cleveland, New Orleans, Austin, Nashville, and Florida are all present here simultaneously. Remote work gutted downtown office demand, which gutted the foot traffic and jobs that justified sky-high rent. Major employers shrank their San Francisco footprint or left outright. Population declined for consecutive years running, one of the sharpest urban population drops of any major U.S. city outside a natural disaster. And insurance and operating costs, driven by California's own climate and liability pressures, kept climbing even as rent rolls shrank underneath landlords. The numbers are almost unbelievable for a city this famous. Downtown San Francisco office vacancy has sat above 30% for years, dragging residential demand down with it. Several luxury apartment towers built during the boom are reporting vacancy above 20%, with landlords quietly offering 2 and 3 months free just to avoid publishing the real numbers. The exact same concession trick from Charlotte, now happening in the most expensive city in the country. A San Francisco property manager posted on a housing forum, "We built a skyline for a workforce that stopped commuting and never really came back." A commenter replied, "San Francisco, the most expensive empty apartment in America, and somehow that's still true." This is the entry that should genuinely change how you see this entire list. San Francisco had everything: jobs, prestige, coastline, culture, the highest rents in the country, and it's still bleeding vacancy, because none of that matters when the underlying math stops working. If it can happen here, it can happen anywhere on this list, and it can happen to the city you live in next. The rent didn't just get too high. The reasons people used to pay it quietly disappeared. One employer, one migration wave, one insurance renewal at a time, and almost nobody noticed until the building started sitting empty. Here's what almost no real estate creator will tell you. Every city on this list publishes asking rent, not what tenants actually pay after concessions. That gap, sometimes 2 or 3 months free, is the single biggest leverage point renters have right now. If you ask directly for concessions instead of accepting the listed price, landlords in these markets are approving it quietly because an empty unit costs them more than a discounted one. Vacancy isn't just a warning sign anymore. It's negotiating power, and almost nobody's using it yet.